How can we know this is the reality instead of a dream? How can we know this is not a hallucination but the reality? We can't trust on our senses. We think something is really hot when it is really cold, like dry ice. How can we know the truth? In science, 1 plus 1 equals 2. That is the truth. The way in which this truth does not change also seems related to the quantum mechanics, also that explains atoms. Or it can become the theory of relativity and explain the stars and planets. What about in philosophy? If it is possible to know or find the perfect unchanged truth, couldn't we use that to understand this world of ours? Descartes says started to get a suspicion about everything, and he responded with his famous words, I think, therefore I am. The way as much as I think it's real. So I can say that I exist. If I did not exist, I wouldn't be able to think this. I must exist to be able to think about this. Unfortunately, modern science has stated that Descartes was wrong. This think we take for granted, we people still do not understand because we are not thinking. We think with our brains. Numerous nerve cells make our brains use neurotransmitters to communicate atoms. Atoms send atoms in order for atoms to be able to communicate, but these movements, do we control them? 1979, Benjamin Libet made an experiment where he connected electrodes to the hand and head of someone. It was to experiment the way in which our brain works. The experiment was based on the person to move his hand whenever he wanted, and they measured the moment when they decided to bend their wrists and how long the wrist muscles took to move. When they decided to make their move, it took 0.15 seconds for this muscle to move. But the results were fascinating. It actually took 0.55 seconds less on their brains to move. It felt like something that it's not me was already making orders. Again, are we really thinking? Or like our hearts? Are our brains moving on their own? No one says I am blood circulating or I am beating my heart. No one states that. But why do we state or say I am thinking? The wrong part where Descartes was wrong and how words of his famous words, I think, therefore I am. That part, if we analyze it quickly, it's the I. If you think that this does not make any sense, let's explain. I am pretty, handsome, ugly, tall, short, smart, dumb, friendly, shy. There are many ways to explain myself or to explain someone. But the funny part is that we cannot use these explanations when no one exists. Others must exist in order to use these explanations. If other people do not exist, there is no way to explain myself because everything becomes relative. Newton and Galileo once stated, the background of the universe is fixed, and objects move in this direction, in that direction, and at this kind of speed. After more years, Einstein came and stated if there are no other objects, we cannot know where the other object is moving, its velocity. Another object must exist in order to know what is the direction or velocity of that object. If there is no object, there cannot be direction or velocity. Why? Because everything becomes relative. This does not only apply to physics. If there are no other people, I cannot explain who am I. If there are other people and can't explain myself, am I actually existing? Many people where they come together to create something virtual called a country, create something virtual that we call money, creating something virtual that we call companies, and that virtual thing that also might mean imaginary. But something, even if 100% of the people who agree to make something virtual or imaginary, virtual is virtual. And myself, who agreed with this virtuality, it's also a virtuality. The concept of I is the ultimate imaginary we have created. The way in which this speaks other words.